My name is Thomas Mitchell, and I'm sitting in my rental car outside the house where I grew up, watching my older brother Vincent load my belongings into garbage bags and toss them onto the front lawn. He's making quite a show of it, stopping occasionally to wipe sweat from his forehead and glance around the neighborhood like he wants witnesses to his righteous anger. "Get your junk and get out," he'd said 3 hours ago when I came by to check on the property. "This is my house now, Tommy. Dad's gone, and I'm done carrying your weight." Vincent is 42, 4 years older than me, and he's never let me forget it. Even now, watching him throw my high school yearbooks into the grass, he moves with that same entitled swagger he's had since we were kids. The successful one, the responsible one, the one who stayed close to home while I chased dreams in California. Dad died 6 weeks ago. Heart attack in his sleep, peaceful according to the paramedics. I flew back from Los Angeles for the funeral, stayed for the estate settlement, then returned to wrap up my life there. Quit my job at the architectural firm, sold my apartment, said goodbye to the woman I'd been seeing for 3 years but never quite committed to. The plan was simple: move back to Ohio, live in the family house for a while, figure out what came next. Dad had always said the house would be ours someday, both of ours. Vincent and I had discussed it during the funeral week. He seemed fine with me staying there, even suggested it might be good to have someone around while he dealt with all the legal paperwork. But when I showed up this morning with my U-Haul, Vincent met me at the door with different energy entirely. Arms crossed, jaw set, speaking to me like I was some vagrant who'd wandered onto his property. "You can't just move back in here," he'd said. "I've got plans for this place." Plans? That was new. I tried reasoning with him, reminded him of our conversations after the funeral, pointed out that Dad had never wanted either of us to feel homeless. Vincent's response was to start gathering my old belongings from my childhood bedroom and carrying them outside. "The house is mine now," he kept saying. "Legally mine." I didn't argue, didn't raise my voice or demand explanations. Just watched as he systematically erased my presence from the place where I'd learned to ride a bike, where I'd broken my arm falling from the oak tree in the backyard, where I'd sat with Dad during his final months before moving to California. Something about Vincent's certainty bothered me. Not just his attitude, but his complete confidence that he had the legal right to throw me out. During the estate proceedings, the lawyer had mentioned the house would need to go through probate, that it might take months to resolve. Vincent had seemed as confused as I was about the timeline. Now, suddenly, he was acting like he held clear title. I started my car and drove to the county courthouse. If Vincent wanted to play the legal card, I needed to understand exactly what cards we were both holding. The clerk in the recorder's office was helpful, pulling up property records that went back decades. Our family had owned the house on Maple Street since 1987, when Dad bought it right after his divorce from our mother was finalized. The deed was straightforward, listing him as sole owner. But as I scrolled through more recent filings, something caught my attention. 3 months ago, Dad had recorded a new deed. Not a will amendment or a transfer on death document, but an actual deed transferring ownership of the property to me. The document was dated February 15th, notarized and witnessed, filed with the county on February 18th. 3 months before Dad died, he had legally transferred the house to Thomas Mitchell, his youngest son, for the sum of $1 and natural love and affection. I stared at the computer screen, reading the deed 3 times to make sure I understood it correctly. According to these records, I had owned the house for months. Vincent had just kicked the legal owner out of his own property. The clerk printed copies of everything, and I sat in my car in the courthouse parking lot trying to piece together why Dad would have done this without telling me. He'd never mentioned transferring the deed, never given any indication that he'd made such a significant decision. But I remembered something now. In February, I'd gotten a call from Dad's doctor asking me to encourage him to set up a healthcare directive and get his affairs in order. Dad had been having some chest pains, nothing serious, but enough to make everyone think about the future. I'd called him that week, and we'd talked about estate planning for the first time. "Don't worry about me, Tommy," he'd said. "I'm taking care of everything, making sure things are clear when the time comes." I thought he meant he was updating his will. Apparently, he'd decided to take more direct action. My phone buzzed with a text from Vincent. "Your stuff is on the curb. Don't come back." I looked at the deed in my hands, then typed back, "We need to talk." His response came immediately. "Nothing to discuss. House is mine." I didn't correct him. Not yet. Instead, I drove to a hotel near the airport, and checked in for the night. Tomorrow, I would visit Dad's lawyer and understand exactly what Dad had intended when he transferred that deed. Tonight, I needed to process the fact that my brother had just illegally evicted me from my own house. Vincent thought he was teaching me a lesson about family hierarchy and responsibility. What he'd actually done was reveal something about his character that I'd suspected but never wanted to acknowledge. When he thought he had power over me, he'd used it without hesitation or mercy. Tomorrow would be interesting. I met with Harrison Webb, Dad's lawyer, first thing Tuesday morning. He was a thin man in his 70s who'd handled our family's legal matters for 2 decades. His office smelled like old books and coffee, and he greeted me with the kind of gentle sympathy that comes from watching families navigate grief and money. "I was wondering when you'd come by," he said, settling behind his desk. "Your father was very specific about his wishes regarding the house." Harrison pulled out a thick file labeled Mitchell Estate and opened it to a section marked with yellow tabs. Inside were copies of the deed I'd found at the courthouse, along with several other documents I hadn't seen. "Your father came to me in February," Harrison explained. "Said he wanted to make sure there wouldn't be any confusion about the house when he was gone. He was concerned about your brother's financial situation." This was news to me. Vincent's financial situation? Harrison nodded carefully. "Your father mentioned that Vincent had been asking about borrowing against the house. Wanted to use the equity for some business venture. Your father was worried that if Vincent inherited the property, creditors might be able to force a sale." He handed me another document. A promissory note dated January 20th, showing that Vincent had borrowed $45,000 from Dad, with the house as collateral. The note was past due. "Vincent never mentioned borrowing money from Dad," I said. "According to your father, Vincent thought the loan would just disappear when he inherited everything. Your father wanted to protect the house from that assumption." Harrison leaned forward. "He transferred the deed to you because you were financially stable and had no claims against the property. The house was meant to stay in the family, not be liquidated to cover your brother's debts." I studied the promissory note. The business venture was listed as Mitchell Brothers Construction, a company I'd never heard of. The loan was secured by a lien against the house, which meant Vincent owed Dad almost $50,000, with our childhood home as guarantee. "Has Vincent been making payments?" I asked. Harrison shook his head. "Not according to your father's records. The loan went into default in November. Your father was planning to address it after the holidays, but then his health declined." He showed me more paperwork. A business license for Mitchell Brothers Construction, filed 6 months ago, with Vincent listed as sole proprietor. Bank statements showing the borrowed money had been spent on equipment, vehicles, and operating expenses. And a series of increasingly desperate letters from suppliers demanding payment for materials delivered but never paid for. Vincent had started a construction company using Dad's money in our house as collateral, then run it into the ground. "What does this mean legally?" I asked. "Well," Harrison said slowly, "since your father transferred the house to you before he died, you inherited it free and clear. But the promissory note is still valid. Vincent owes that money to your father's estate, which means he owes it to you now, as the primary beneficiary." I was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. Vincent hadn't just kicked me out of the house we grew up in. He'd kicked me out of a house he'd used as collateral for a failed business venture, a house he still owed $45,000 against. "There's one more thing," Harrison said. He handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in Dad's careful handwriting. "He asked me to give you this when you came in about the deed." I opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a brief note. "Tommy, by the time you read this, you'll know about the house and the loan. I'm sorry I didn't tell you about Vincent's business troubles while I was alive. I kept hoping he'd figure it out on his own. The house is yours now, free and clear, but your brother is family. Use your judgment about the debt. Love, Dad." I folded the letter and put it in my pocket. Dad had known exactly what kind of situation he was leaving behind. He'd protected the house from Vincent's creditors, but left the family relationship for me to navigate. "What are my options?" I asked Harrison. "Legally, you can demand immediate payment of the promissory note, force Vincent to refinance or sell his own assets to cover the debt. Or you can forgive the loan entirely. Or anything in between." He paused. "Your father hoped you'd find a solution that kept the family together." I thanked Harrison and walked out to my car with a folder full of documents that completely changed my understanding of the previous day's events. Vincent hadn't just been cruel when he threw me out. He'd been protecting a secret that would have destroyed his image as the responsible older brother. His construction company was failing. He owed Dad money he couldn't pay back, and he'd been planning to inherit the house to solve his financial problems, not realizing that Dad had already transferred ownership to protect the property from those same problems. I drove past the house on Maple Street. Vincent's truck was in the driveway, and I could see him through the window, pacing while talking on his phone. Probably dealing with more creditors, more demands for payment he couldn't make. My belongings were still scattered on the front lawn where he'd thrown them yesterday. The neighbors had politely ignored the spectacle, but I could see curtains moving as people checked to see if the drama was continuing. I parked across the street and called Vincent's number. "What do you want?" he answered on the first ring. "To come home," I said simply. "I told you yesterday." "Vincent," I interrupted. "We need to talk about Mitchell Brothers construction." The silence stretched for nearly 30 seconds. When he spoke again, his voice was different. Smaller. "Where are you?" "Outside." Through the window, I watched him look toward the street, spot my car, and sink into Dad's old recliner. His shoulders dropped like someone had cut the strings holding him upright. "Come in," he said, and hung up. I gathered the legal documents and walked up the front steps of my own house for the second time in 2 days. This time, I was coming home with leverage. Vincent opened the door before I could knock. His face was gray, and he looked like he'd aged 5 years overnight. He stepped aside without a word, and I walked into the living room where we'd watched cartoons as kids and argued about TV channels as teenagers. "How much do you know?" he asked, still standing by the door like he might need to run. "All of it." I set the legal folder on Dad's coffee table. The loan, the business, the lien on the house, the deed. He sat down heavily on the couch, elbows on his knees, head in his hands. I thought I could make it work. The construction business seemed like such a sure thing. Houses going up everywhere. Everyone needs reliable contractors. $45,000, Vincent. "I know." His voice was muffled. I kept meaning to tell Dad about the problems, but every time I came over here, he looked so proud when he talked about me running my own company. I couldn't disappoint him. I opened the folder and pulled out the promissory note. This went into default 4 months ago. I was trying to catch up. Had a big job lined up that would have covered everything, but the client backed out last minute. Then another job fell through. Before I knew it, I was in too deep to climb out. Vincent finally looked up at me. His eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted. When Dad died, I hoped the debt would just disappear with him. I figured I'd inherit the house, sell it if I had to, pay off the creditors, and start over. "So you decided to kick me out before I could discover the truth." He nodded miserably. "I panicked when you showed up with that U-Haul. I thought if you moved in, you'd start going through Dad's papers, asking questions about his finances. I needed time to figure out how to handle the debt." I pulled out the deed transfer document. "Dad transferred the house to me 3 months ago, Vincent. You kicked the legal owner out of his own property." The color drained from his face completely. "That's impossible. Dad never said anything about changing the ownership. He was protecting the house from your creditors. If you'd inherited it with all these debts, they could have forced a sale." I set the deed on the table between us. "He knew you were in trouble." Vincent stared at the document like it might change if he looked at it long enough. "So I don't inherit anything?" "You inherit Dad's other assets. His savings account, his life insurance policy, his car. But the house comes to me, free and clear of your business debts." "How much are the other assets worth?" I consulted Harrison's paperwork. "About $32,000 total." Vincent did the math quickly. Even with his inheritance, he'd still owe me $13,000 on the promissory note, assuming I chose to enforce it. "I'm ruined," he said quietly. "The business is dead. I owe money to half the suppliers in town, and now I owe you 13 grand I don't have." I looked around the living room, seeing it differently now. This wasn't just the house where we'd grown up. It was a financial asset worth nearly $300,000, money that could solve Vincent's problems completely if I chose to sell it and split the proceeds. But it was also the place where Dad had spent his final years, where he'd transferred the deed to me specifically because he wanted to keep it in the family. "Tell me about the business," I said. "What exactly went wrong?" For the next hour, Vincent walked me through the complete disaster of Mitchell Brothers construction. He'd started with good intentions and a decent business plan, But he'd underbid jobs to get clients, bought equipment he couldn't afford, and hired workers without understanding the tax and insurance obligations. The borrowed money from Dad had been spent on a used excavator, a dump truck, and materials for 3 different projects. 2 of the jobs had been completed but hadn't paid enough to cover costs. The 3rd job was still unfinished because he'd run out of money for materials. "I've got about $8,000 worth of equipment left," he said. "The excavator and some tools. Everything else is gone or claimed by creditors." "What about the unfinished job?" "Mrs. Henderson on Oak Street. Foundation and driveway for her addition. I owe her $12,000 back, or I need to finish the work." He rubbed his face. "I don't have the money for materials, and I can't do the work without them." I was quiet for a long time, thinking about Dad's note. "Your brother is family. Use your judgment about the debt." "Here's what's going to happen," I said finally. "I'm moving back into this house. My belongings are still on the front lawn, and you're going to help me carry them back inside." Vincent looked confused. "But the money I owe you." "We'll figure that out. But first, you're going to finish Mrs. Henderson's job." "Thomas, I just told you I can't afford the materials." "I can." I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app, showing him the balance. "I sold everything in California. I've got enough to buy materials and pay you a salary to finish her project properly." "Why would you do that?" I thought about it. Because Dad believed in second chances. Because Mrs. Henderson deserves to get what she paid for. And because you're going to learn how to run a construction business the right way before I trust you with anything else. Vincent stared at me. "You're serious?" "Dead serious. We're going to finish her job, pay back her deposit overage, and then we're going to sit down and figure out if Mitchell Brothers Construction can actually work as a real business." I stood up. "But first, you're going to help me move my stuff back into my house, and you're going to apologize for throwing me out yesterday." "Thomas, I'm not done. You're also going to call Mrs. Henderson and explain that you've brought in a partner who's going to make sure her project gets finished right. And you're going to start keeping books like a real business owner instead of just hoping things work out." He was quiet for a long moment. "And the debt to Dad? We'll call it an investment in the new Mitchell Brothers Construction." Assuming there's going to be a new Mitchell Brothers Construction. There really is going to be a Brothers in the name? I looked around the living room one more time, seeing Dad's chair, the family photos on the mantel, the scratches in the hardwood floor from when we tried to move furniture as kids. "Dad wanted to keep the family together," I said. "Maybe it's time we actually acted like brothers instead of just competitors." Vincent nodded slowly, then stood up. "Your stuff is probably soaked from last night's rain. Then you better hope you're good with a washing machine." For the first time in years, my older brother actually smiled at something I'd said. "Come on, little brother. Let's get you moved back home." As we walked outside to gather my belongings, I realized this wasn't how I'd expected my homecoming to go. But sometimes the best plans are the ones that emerge from disasters, built on truth instead of assumptions. Vincent picked up one of my soaked boxes and looked at me. "Are you really going to trust me with construction equipment and a business loan?" "No," I said, grabbing another box. "I'm going to trust Dad's judgment. He believed you could figure it out if someone gave you the right kind of help. And if I mess it up again?" I shrugged. "Then we'll figure out something else." That's what brothers do. 6 months later, I'm standing in Mrs. Henderson's backyard watching Vincent apply the final coat of sealant to her new driveway. The addition is complete, the foundation is solid, and she's already recommended us to 3 of her neighbors. Mitchell Brothers Construction has finished 4 projects since we started over, each one profitable, each one building our reputation. Vincent has learned to bid jobs properly, keep detailed books, and save money for equipment maintenance. I handle the business side and the architectural elements while he manages the crew and the actual construction. It turns out we make a decent team when we're not competing for Dad's approval. The promissory note is officially forgiven, marked paid in full, in exchange for Vincent's partnership in the legitimate version of the business. We moved Dad's old desk into the house's front room and turned it into our company office. Vincent handles the field work, I handle the contracts and design, and we meet every Sunday morning at Dad's kitchen table to review the books and plan the upcoming week. "That's the last of it," Vincent calls, walking over with the sealant brush. "Mrs. Henderson should be able to park on this tomorrow." I nod, checking items off our completion list. Materials cost came in exactly where we estimated. Labor was 2 hours under budget. Profit, $3,200 after all expenses. Vincent grins. It's taken him 6 months to really believe that construction work can actually make money when it's done right. Not bad for a week's work. My phone buzzes with a text from our newest client, requesting a bid for a whole house renovation. 3-bedroom ranch that needs everything from foundation work to a new roof. It's the biggest job we've been asked to quote. You ready for something major? I ask, showing Vincent the text. He wipes his hands on his work shirt and considers the question seriously. 6 months ago, he would have said yes immediately, afraid that turning down work meant admitting weakness. Now he thinks about our capacity, our cash flow, our ability to deliver quality work on schedule. How big is major? $80,000 project. 6 weeks of work if we do it right. Do we have enough working capital to carry materials for something that size? This is the Vincent I can work with. The one who asks smart questions instead of making assumptions. We'll need a construction loan, but Harrison Webb knows a banker who specializes in contractor financing. Our track record should be strong enough now. Let's look at it this weekend, Vincent says. Draw up some preliminary plans, figure out realistic timelines. As we load tools into the truck, Mrs. Henderson comes out to inspect the finished driveway. She's 73 years old, pays her bills on time, and has no patience for contractors who overpromise and underdeliver. She'd been understandably skeptical when Vincent showed up 6 months ago to explain how he was going to fix his previous mistakes. Beautiful work, boys, she says, running her hand along the sealed surface. Exactly what I wanted. Thank you, Mrs. Henderson, Vincent replies. We appreciate you giving us the chance to make this right. She nods approvingly. Your father would be proud. He always said you Mitchell boys would figure things out eventually. After she goes inside, Vincent and I finish loading the truck in comfortable silence. This routine has become familiar. Complete a job, clean up the site, head home to update our records, and plan the next project. You ever think about what would have happened if you hadn't found that deed? Vincent asks as we drive back toward Maple Street. I consider the question. You would have inherited the house, tried to sell it to pay your debts, discovered the lien, and probably lost everything anyway. Plus, Mrs. Henderson would still be dealing with an unfinished addition. And you? I'd probably be working for some architectural firm in Cleveland, wondering why you stopped returning my calls. Vincent is quiet for a few blocks. I was scared, he says finally. When Dad died, when the business started failing, when you showed up wanting to move home. I was scared that everyone would see that I wasn't the responsible one after all. You were scared that I'd find out you were human. Yeah, basically. I turn into our driveway, parking next to Vincent's truck and the small trailer we use for equipment. The house looks the same as it did when we were kids, but it feels different now. Less like a place we're both trying to claim, and more like a place we're both working to maintain. Dad's note said to use my judgment about the dead. I tell Vincent as we walk up the front steps. But I think his real message was simpler than that. What do you mean? He wanted us to stop competing and start collaborating. The business loan, the deed transfer, even leaving that note for me to find. It was all designed to force us to figure out how to be brothers instead of rivals. Vincent unlocks the front door and holds it open for me. Think it worked? I look around the living room where we fought as kids, argued as teenagers, and finally learned to talk as adults. Dad's chair is still in its place by the window, but now there's a computer desk beside it where we keep project files and client contracts. The family photos are still on the mantle, but there are new ones now. Pictures of completed projects, Vincent and me at job sites, Mrs. Henderson standing proudly beside her finished edition. Yeah, I say. I think it worked. That evening, we sit at Dad's kitchen table reviewing the day's work and planning tomorrow's schedule. Vincent sketches rough dimensions for the renovation project while I calculate material costs and labor estimates. Outside, the November wind rattles the windows of the house that's now officially mine but feels like ours. You know what the best part is? Vincent says, looking up from his sketches. What's that? When we finish that big renovation, we'll have enough money to pay for new gutters on this place. Dad always said the gutters needed replacing. I smile, remembering Dad standing on a ladder every fall, cleaning leaves and complaining about how the old gutters leaked. Mitchell Brothers Construction's first major home improvement project. Working on our own house. Right where we started. Vincent grins and returns to his sketches. I update our project timeline and think about Dad's note one more time. Use your judgment about the debt. His judgment had been to trust that two brothers who'd spent their whole lives competing could learn to build something together instead. Turned out he was right about that, too. The house on Maple Street is still in the family. The Mitchell Brothers construction sign in the front yard is small and professional, the kind of understated advertising that comes from word-of-mouth reputation rather than desperate marketing. And every Sunday morning, we still meet at Dad's kitchen table to plan the week ahead. Two brothers who finally learned that the best foundations are built on trust, not competition.